They insisted it was family money. They called me selfish for asking where it went. But when my mother actually laughed after draining $150,000 from the account, I realized a line had been crossed. That money was the only way to save my daughter. I let them laugh, but they had no idea that the price they were about to pay would not be measured in currency. My name is Rachel Donovan. At 34 years old, I had conditioned myself to view the world not through rose-colored glasses, but through the terrifying clarity of medical actuary tables, living in North Clay, a mid-sized city in the Midwest where the winter clouds hung low and gray for 6 months of the year. I had learned that hope was a strategy, but cash was a tactic, and I needed a lot of tactics. My 7-year-old daughter, Lily, was born with a structural defect in her heart valves that required a specialized reconstruction procedure. It was not a question of if, but when. For 5 years, I had worked myself into the ground at Stratford Consulting. I was the person in the back office who made sure corporate restructuring plans didn't violate labor laws. It was dry, soul-sucking work that required 60-hour weeks. But it paid. I saved with a desperation that bordered on mania. I drove a 10-year-old sedan. I cut my own hair. I stopped buying new clothes. Every single cent went into the Lily Fund. Last week, I had finally hit the magic number, $150,000. That was the deductible, the travel costs to the specialist in Boston, the 6 weeks of unpaid leave I would need to take for her recovery, and the contingency for the complications the doctors warned me about. My parents, Linda and Paul, lived 3 streets over. They were the pillars of our local community church, the kind of people who brought casseroles to funerals and always sat in the front row. They had mastered the art of performative sacrifice. Growing up, I was constantly reminded of how much they gave up for me, a debt that could never quite be repaid. "You look exhausted," Rachel, my mother had said 2 weeks ago, pouring me a cup of decaf coffee in her pristine, beige kitchen. "You carry the weight of the world. Let us carry some of it." She had suggested the joint account. The logic seemed sound at the time, wrapped in her soft, concerned voice. She pointed out that if I was in the ICU with Lily and a sudden payment needed to be authorized, or if my bank flagged a large out-of-state transfer while I was unreachable, we could lose our surgical slot. "We just want to be your backup," she had said, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Your father and I. We can't do much, but we can handle the admin while you handle being a mother." I wanted to believe in the safety net. I wanted to believe that the tension I felt around them, the way my father would sigh loudly when I talked about my salary, or the way my mother would make subtle jabs about my single status, was just normal family friction. So I did it. I moved the $150,000 into a high-yield savings account where both my mother and I were signatories. For the first few days, it felt like a relief. I showed them the deposit slip during Sunday dinner. My father nodded, cutting his roast beef with precise, aggressive strokes. "Good," he said. "Family looks out for family. It is high time you stopped trying to be a martyr, Rachel." But the air in their house always felt thin, as if oxygen was a finite resource they controlled. Over the next week, small things began to itch at the back of my mind. My mother started talking about a long-overdue sunroom addition they had put off for years. My father suddenly stopped complaining about the rising cost of his blood pressure medication. These were innocuous details, the kind of things you brush off because you do not want to be the suspicious, ungrateful daughter. I told myself I was being paranoid. This was the Midwest. We trusted our neighbors, surely. I could trust the people who gave me life. Tonight, after putting Lily to bed, I sat down at my kitchen island with a glass of water. It was just a routine check. I logged into the banking portal, expecting to see the balance sitting there, accruing its modest 4% interest. The page loaded. The balance read $150,000. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. It was all there. Then I clicked on the transaction history, just to see when the next interest payment would post. My eyes scanned the lines. Deposit confirmed, interest pending, and then, at the very bottom of the screen, a small line item caught my eye. It was a test transaction from yesterday, a debit of $0.01, followed immediately by a credit of $0.01. The description wasn't from the bank. It was a verification code for an external linkage to a private investment platform called Vantage Growth. I stared at the screen. I had not linked the account to anything. I felt a cold prickle start at the base of my neck. I reached for my phone to call my mother, but then I stopped. The timestamp on the verification was 3 a.m. "Mom," I whispered to the empty room, my thumb hovering over her contact name. "What did you do?" The withdrawal happened on a Tuesday. I remember the day clearly because I was heating up leftover lasagna for Lily and watching the rain streak against the kitchen window. I checked the banking app, a nervous habit I had developed over the last 48 hours. The number that stared back at me was no longer $150,000. It was $135,000. $15,000 had vanished in a single electronic heartbeat. There was no pending notification, no alert, just a clean, silent excision of funds. My hands shook as I dialed my mother's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice light and airy, the background noise of a television game show humming behind her. "Hi. Honey, did you get the casserole dish back to Mom? $15,000 is gone from the account." I cut her off, my voice tight. What happened? There was a pause on the other end, but it was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of someone calibrating a spin. "Oh, Rachel, honestly," she sighed, the sound crackling with impatient affection. "You act like the sky is falling. Your father just moved a portion into a short-term liquidity rotation. It earns better interest than that stagnant savings account. It is just a temporary advance to secure the rate." A liquidity rotation. I repeated the words. They sounded meaningful but meant absolutely nothing. "Mom, that money is for the surgery. It cannot be locked up in investments. If the hospital calls, I need it liquid immediately." "And it will be," she soothed, her tone shifting to that pitying register she used when I was a teenager and didn't understand why I couldn't go to the prom because the money was needed for car repairs. "You worry so much, sweetheart. It is bad for your skin. We are just managing the portfolio. You trust us, don't you? After all we have done, that question was the trap. It always was." I hung up, but the lasagna tasted like ash in my mouth. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, I went to the closet in the hallway and pulled down a dusty plastic bin labeled "Important Documents." I sat on the floor, surrounded by old tax returns and faded receipts. I needed to see if I was crazy. I found the paperwork from when I was 22. I had saved $3,000 for a deposit on an apartment so I could move out. My father had borrowed it to fix the transmission on his truck, promising to pay me back in a month. He never did. When I asked about it, they told me I was being transactional and that family did not keep score. I found the letter from the university scholarship I had won at 18, the one I declined because my mother cried for 3 days, saying she couldn't handle her depression if I moved 2 states away. I realized then that my life had been a series of small cannibalizations. They consumed my opportunities to feed their comfort. The next day, I went to my parents' house to pick up Lily after school. The atmosphere was stiflingly normal. My father was reading the newspaper at the kitchen table. He didn't look up when I entered. "Dad, about the transfer." I started, keeping my voice level. He turned a page, the paper rustling loudly in the quiet room. "It is handled. Rachel, stop micromanaging. You are acting like a hysterical woman. It is unbecoming." He didn't look at me. He looked through me. To him. I wasn't an independent adult with a dying child. I was an asset they had created. Something that paid dividends. I took Lily by the hand and walked her to the car. As I buckled her into her booster seat, she looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Mommy?" she asked. "Yes." Bug Grandma said something funny today," Lily said, fiddling with the strap of her seatbelt. She said that people who love their families don't keep money all to themselves. She said you have to learn to share so everyone can be happy. My blood ran cold. They were not just moving money. They were planting seeds in my 7-year-old daughter's mind. They were normalizing the theft before it even fully happened. I drove home in silence, the windshield wipers slapping a steady rhythm against the glass. When we got inside, I didn't log into the banking app. Instead, I went to my desk and took out a fresh black notebook. I sat down and wrote the date at the top of the first page. Then, I wrote November 14th, $15,000 withdrawn, reason given liquidity rotation. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was going to document. The safety of the family unit had fractured, and through the crack, I could finally see the predator waiting on the other side. The drive to my parents' house took 20 minutes, but I remember none of it. I remember only the sensation of my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of old bone. When I parked in their driveway, the house looked indistinguishable from the home I had grown up in. The manicured lawn, the fresh coat of slate blue paint, the wind chimes singing softly on the porch. It was a perfect suburban mask hiding the rot inside. I didn't knock. I used the key they had given me for emergencies, though I now realized the only emergency they ever planned for was their own insolvency. They were in the sunroom at the back of the house. The late afternoon light filtered through the glass, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. My father was sitting in his leather recliner, nursing a tumbler of amber liquid that I knew was expensive scotch. My mother was flipping through a glossy brochure, her face lit with a terrifying, childlike excitement. "Where is it?" I asked. The silence that followed was heavy, but not with guilt. It was the annoyance of adults being interrupted by a noisy child. My father took a slow sip of his drink. He didn't look at me. He looked at the baseboard, at the window. Anywhere but my face. "Rachel, lower your voice. The neighbors. I do not care about the neighbors," I said, stepping into the room. My legs felt weak, but I forced them to hold me upright. I logged into the account. It is empty. $150,000. Gone. Where is the money for Lily's heart surgery? My mother finally looked up. She didn't look ashamed. She looked radiant, practically vibrating with adrenaline. "It is not gone." "Silly," she said, waving the brochure at me. "It is invested. We put it into Vantage Growth. It is a land development project in Arizona. High-yield, exclusive buy-in. We had to move fast to get the Tier 1 status." You invested it?" I felt the room tilt. That is not investment money. That is survival money. Lily needs that surgery in 4 months. It is scheduled. The deposit is due in 6 weeks. And you will have it, my mother insisted, her voice taking on that sharp, lecturing tone. "The returns are guaranteed. We are going to double that money in 6 months. Imagine, Rachel, $300,000. We could redo the kitchen. We could take a family cruise. We are doing this for us. There is no us in that account," I whispered. "That was my money. I worked for it. I saved it. I ate ramen noodles for 5 years for it." My mother stood up then, brushing invisible lint from her skirt. She looked at me with a pitying smile, the kind one gives to a slow learner. Then, she let out a short, breathy laugh. "Oh, Rachel, you always make everything so heavy," she said. "You were just letting it sit there in a savings account, losing value against inflation. It was irresponsible. Really. Thanks for finally letting us put it to good use." The words hit me like physical blows. Thanks for, as if I had given them a gift, as if the theft of my daughter's future was a favor I had performed for their comfort. I looked at my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, the man who was supposed to be the protector. Dad, you agreed to this. He swirled the ice in his glass, the clinking sound loud in the quiet room. Your mother has a vision. Rachel, you need to stop being so selfish. You act like you are the only one with needs. We have sacrificed everything for you. It is high time the family saw some return on investment. Return on investment. That was what I was to them. Not a daughter. An asset class. I looked down at the coffee table. Spread out among the glossy photos of desert condos and swimming pools were the bank transfer papers. They must have printed them out for their records. I saw the transfer confirmation for the final sweep of the funds. It was a wire transfer request, the kind that required a signature from all account holders for amounts over $10,000. I leaned in closer. My breath hitched. At the bottom of the page, there were two signatures. One was my father's jagged scrawl. The other was my name, Rachel Donovan, but the letters were too round. The slant was wrong. It was a perfect imitation of how I signed my report cards in the 3rd grade, not how I signed legal documents today. My mother had forged my signature. She hadn't just bullied me or guilt-tripped me. She had committed a felony. I stared at the ink. A strange, cold clarity washed over me. If I screamed now, they would call me hysterical. If I cried, they would comfort me and tell me I was overreacting, pulling me back into their web of gaslighting. They expected me to beg. They expected me to ask for the money back so they could hold it over my head and make me dance for it. But the Rachel who begged for their approval had died the moment my mother laughed. I see, I said. My voice was unrecognizable to my own ears, flat, metallic, dead. You have made a choice. We made an investment, my father corrected, finally looking at me with defiance in his eyes. And you will thank us later. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I simply turned around and walked toward the door. Rachel, my mother called out, a hint of confusion in her voice. Where are you going? Stay for dinner. We are having pot roast. I opened the front door and stepped out into the cool evening air. I did not look back. I was not going to eat their pot roast. I was not going to argue. I was going to destroy them. And I had seen exactly the piece of paper I needed to start the fire. I stopped crying exactly 3 hours after I left their house. Tears were a biological response to grief, and I was no longer grieving. I was calculating. For the next 3 days, I answered my mother's texts with single-word replies. When she asked if I was still pouting, I replied with a simple no. When she sent a picture of a new patio set she was eyeing for the sunroom, I sent back a thumbs-up emoji. I severed the emotional conduit that fed them. To them, I was the compliant daughter slowly coming around. In reality, I was a forensic accountant dismantling a crime scene. I spent those nights dissecting the few papers I had managed to photograph with my phone before walking out of their sunroom. I enlarged the images on my laptop until the pixels blurred. I studied the Vantage Growth terms of service. It was a high-risk, illiquid private equity fund. But then I noticed something in the fine print of the liquidity clause. To qualify for the Tier 1 status my mother had bragged about, the investors had to pledge collateral equal to 50% of the principal if the cash buy-in was from a joint account. They hadn't just stolen my $150,000. By forging my signature to authorize the transfer as a joint investment strategy, they had inadvertently linked their primary asset, their paid-off house, to the performance of the fund. They thought they were gambling with my money, but they had placed their own deed on the table without reading the rules. On Thursday morning, I called in sick to work. I drove 45 minutes to West Crossing, a sleepy town just across the county line where my parents had no social influence. I had an appointment with Elias Thorne, a lawyer who specialized in elder law and financial fraud. His office smelled of stale coffee and old paper, a comforting scent of bureaucracy. I laid the printed photographs of the documents and the banking history on his mahogany desk. He reviewed them in silence for 10 minutes, his heavy brows knitting together. "You said you did not sign this wire transfer request, Mr. Thorne asked, tapping the image of the forgery. "No," I said, my voice steady. "My mother signed it. She has a distinctive way of looping her R's that she tried to hide. But it is there." He leaned back, taking off his glasses. "Rachel, this is bank fraud, identity theft. Given the amount, it is a felony. We could go to the police today. You could freeze the funds, though getting them back from a private equity firm is messy. It could take years of litigation. I do not want to go to the police yet," I said. "If I arrest them, the money gets tied up in evidence. Lily needs surgery in 4 months. I need that money liquid, and I need them to have no legal standing to stop me from taking it back." Mr. Thorne looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. He saw the mother who had run out of options. "What are you asking? Then, if I can prove they coerced me or forged this, does the liability clause on the investment void out?" "No," he said slowly. "If you prove forgery, the transaction is void ab initio. But if you can get them to admit, in writing or on record, that they acted as your agents without your consent, while simultaneously acknowledging the collateral terms, well, you would not just get your principal back. You could technically force a liquidation of the collateral to cover the breach of fiduciary duty." A cold smile touched my lips. "So, if they lose the money, they lose their house. Unless they pay me back immediately, essentially," he warned, "but you need indisputable proof. Not just a he said she said about a signature. I will get it." I promised. I drove back to North Clay with a plan forming in the dark corners of my mind. It required me to do the hardest thing I had ever done. I had to apologize to the people who robbed me. That evening, I went to their house. I wore a soft pastel sweater, the kind my mother liked. I made sure my shoulders were slumped, my posture submissive. When I walked in, the smell of pot roast still lingered, stale and heavy. "Well, look who decided to rejoin the family," my father said from his armchair. He didn't look up from his tablet. My mother rushed over, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She searched my face for defiance, but I gave her only exhaustion. "I am sorry about the other day," I said, the lie tasting like copper on my tongue. I panicked. It is a lot of money. Mom, I was just scared for Lily." My mother's face softened into a triumphant smirk. She pulled me into a hug that felt like being squeezed by a boa constrictor. "Oh, honey, I told your father you just needed time to process. We are doing this for you, for Lily. You have to trust that we know better." "I know," I said into her shoulder, my eyes wide open and dry. "I want to trust you. I want to be part of this success." I pulled away and looked at my father. "If we are going to make money on this, I want to learn. Mom said the returns are tracked online." "They certainly are," my father said, puffing out his chest. "Up 2% already since Tuesday." "That is amazing," I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. Could you add my email to the notification list? Since my name is on the investment, I would love to see the weekly reports. It would help me sleep better knowing the money is growing." My father exchanged a look with my mother. They saw a defeated daughter trying to feel involved. They did not see the trap. "I suppose that is harmless," my father said. "I will forward the access link to you." "Thanks, Dad," I said. "I just want to be on the same page." I left 10 minutes later. As soon as I got into my car, my phone pinged. It was an automated email from Vantage Growth invitation to view portfolio shared access granted by Paul Donovan. I didn't start the car immediately. I sat there in the dark driveway, the blue light of the phone illuminating my face. That link was the key. It gave me access to the internal messaging system of the investment platform, a system that logged every login, every download, and every user acknowledgement. I typed a reply to the automated system, which I knew would copy to my father's inbox. "Access received. Thank you for handling the transfer and the signatures for me. I am ready to see what you built." It looked like gratitude. In a court of law, it would look like entrapment. I put the car in reverse and backed out slowly, leaving the perfect house behind. The war had started, and they didn't even know they were under siege. For the next 10 days, I became a ghost in my own life, haunting the periphery of my parents' newfound glory. I called them every evening at exactly 6 o'clock. I asked about the market trends. I complimented my father's financial foresight. I let my mother lecture me on the importance of patience. I fed their egos until they were bloated and sluggish with self-importance. They thought I had rolled over. They thought the fight was over. They had no idea I was simply digging a trench. On Sunday afternoon, I arrived at their house for the obligatory family dinner. I brought a bottle of wine and a manila folder. My stomach churned with acid, but my hands were steady. This was the pivot point. I needed one final signature to seal the trap Mr. Thorne and I had devised. It was a joint asset management confirmation form from the bank, a document usually used to confirm that all parties agree to high-risk trades. But Mr. Thorne had highlighted a specific clause on the second page. By signing, the primary account holders acknowledge full personal liability for all leveraged positions, using the primary residence as collateral. I walked into the kitchen. My mother was stirring gravy, her face flushed with excitement. "Rachel, did you see the numbers today?" she chirped, not even turning around. "We are up another—" "Oh, what was it?" "Nearly $2,000 on paper, I saw." "Mom, it is incredible," I said, setting the wine on the counter. You were right. I was being too cautious. My father walked in, looking smug. Caution is for people who do not understand how money works. "Rachel, wealth favors the bold." "That is actually what I wanted to talk about," I said, pulling the folder out. I was reading the platform's fee structure. Apparently, because we are in the high-yield tier, they charge a 2% management fee unless we file a waiver confirming we are experienced investors. 2% of the total is, well, it is $3,000 a year. I thought we should save that. The mention of saving money triggered my father's greed reflex instantly. He put on his reading glasses and reached for the folder. "Smart girl," he muttered. "Let me see that." I held my breath. This was the dangerous moment. If he read the paragraph above the signature line, he would see the word collateral. Just then, the doorbell rang. "I will get it," my mother sang out. She opened the door to reveal Mrs. Gable, their next-door neighbor and the biggest gossip in the Tri-County area. She was holding a Tupperware container. "Linda, I just brought back your pie dish," Mrs. Gable announced, stepping into the hallway. "Oh, hello, Paul. Hello, Rachel." Perfect timing. "Mrs. Gable," I said, flashing a bright, fake smile. "Dad was just teaching me about investment strategy. We are saving fees right now." I turned back to my father, creating a sense of urgency. "Dad, if we sign this now, I can upload it tonight before the market opens on Monday." "Mrs. Gable, would you mind witnessing it? The bank likes a third-party signature for waivers." My father hesitated. His eyes were scanning the document. "Wait, what is this part here about personal asset guarantee?" My heart hammered against my ribs. I had to pivot. "Fast." "Oh, that I said," keeping my voice dismissive. "That just confirms the house is the mailing address for the account, so they know where to send the tax forms. It is standard anti-laundering stuff. If we do not sign, they take the $3,000 out of the profits. $3,000 just for paperwork." My mother scoffed from the doorway. "Paul, just sign the thing. Do not let them nickel and dime us." My father looked at me, then at Mrs. Gable, who was watching with mild interest. The pressure of an audience and the promise of saving money overcame his caution. "Fine," he grunted, "but you handle the upload." He scribbled his name. Mrs. Gable signed below him with a flourish. "There." Mrs. Gable beamed. "You are such a good daughter, helping your parents like this." "I try," I said. I slid the paper into my bag immediately. My hands were trembling, so I clasped them together. I had it. I had the admission of liability. But I wasn't done. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone. Dad, while Mrs. Gable is here, can you explain the strategy one more time? I want to record it so I can listen later and really understand. You explained the liquidity rotation so well before. I hit the record button on the voice memo app and set the phone on the table. My father preened. He loved an audience. Well, he began, his voice booming. The key is leveraging the initial capital. We took the $150,000, which was sitting there doing nothing, and moved it into aggressive futures. And you did this on Tuesday. Right, I prompted, without waiting for the bank authorization. We had to move fast. Rachel, he said, waving a hand. If we had waited for your permission, we would have missed the window. Sometimes the head of the household has to make the executive decision. I see, I said softly. So you decided to override my signature requirement to make the trade. It was necessary. My mother chimed in, pouring coffee for Mrs. Gable. And look at the results. We are going to buy a boat next summer. I looked at the phone recording every word. He had just admitted to unauthorized trading and bypassing security protocols on a recorded line, in front of a witness. A boat, I repeated. That sounds nice. Suddenly, my father frowned. He looked at the phone, then at me. A shadow of suspicion crossed his face. Why are you recording this again? He asked, his voice dropping an octave. You never record things. I told you. Dad, I said, reaching out and stopping the recording with a steady finger. I am learning. I want to be just like you. I stood up, slinging my bag over my shoulder. The signed document burned against my hip. I have to get home to Lily. I said, I will upload that waiver tonight. You are not staying for dinner, my mother asked. Offended. Not tonight, I said. I have a lot of work to do. I walked out of the house. As I reached my car, I saw my father watching me from the window. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked like a man who had just heard a twig snap in the woods, but couldn't see the wolf yet. He was right to be worried. I wasn't just taking the money back. I was taking the house. The house of cards did not fall gently. It imploded with the violence of a demolition charge. It started on a Tuesday, 3 days after I had secured the collateral waiver. I was at my desk at Stratford Consulting when the news alert flashed across my monitor. SEC halts operations of Vantage Growth Partners. Assets frozen in alleged Ponzi scheme. My phone began to ring 3 minutes later. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then my father called. Voicemail. Then the house line. I put my phone on silent and continued reviewing a spreadsheet. I was not hiding. I was waiting for the panic to distill into desperation. At noon, my mother appeared in the lobby of my office building. She looked like a woman who had dressed in the dark. Her blouse was misbuttoned, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, animalistic fear. I went down to meet her, not as a daughter, but as a crisis manager handling a volatile client. They took it, she gasped, grabbing my arm the moment I stepped off the elevator. Her grip was bruising. Rachel, you have to do something. The website says... It says, access denied. Your father tried to withdraw the principal, but the bank said the accounts are flagged. I gently removed her hand from my sleeve. Mom, keep your voice down. This is a place of business. How can you be so calm? She shrieked, her voice cracking. It is $150,000 and the other money. It is all frozen. Vantage Growth is under federal investigation, I said, my voice devoid of empathy. I saw the news. Once the SEC steps in, those assets are locked for months, maybe years. There is nothing I can do. But we need that money liquid. She cried. The boat deposit. Oh God. Rachel. We borrowed against the life insurance policy too. We thought it was a sure thing. I blinked. That was new information. They had dug the hole deeper than I thought. You did what we wanted to maximize the tier. She sobbed. Your father said. He said if we hit the $250,000 mark, the returns would triple. We put everything in. If we cannot get it out, we cannot pay the premiums. We cannot pay the mortgage. That sounds like a significant liquidity problem, I said coldly. By the time I drove home that evening, the social fallout had already begun. Mrs. Gable had evidently seen the police cars parked in front of my parents' house, likely serving subpoenas for records in the neighborhood telephone tree had activated. My phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Gable. Is it true about your father? The church treasurer is saying Paul promised to return the building fund money by Friday. I stopped my car in my driveway and stared at the screen. My father had not just gambled his own money and mine. He had dipped into the church funds he managed. I drove to their house. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the lights were off. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. My mother was pacing the floor, clutching a handkerchief. The treasurer called. My father whispered. His voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from inside a well. He wants the $20,000 back. Tomorrow. You took money from the church, I asked. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. He looked up, his face gray and aged. It was a bridge loan. Rachel. Just for a week, I was going to put it back with the first interest payment. I was trying to build a legacy. You stole from the church, I corrected him, and you stole from your granddaughter, and now, because of the waiver you signed on Sunday, the bank knows you pledged the house to cover the losses. The waiver. My mother stopped pacing. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing. You said that was for saving fees. I said it was for liability. I replied calmly. You did not read it. You were too busy counting money you had not earned. You knew. My father said. He stood up slowly, a look of dawning horror on his face. You knew this was going to happen. I knew you were greedy. I said. And I knew you were reckless. I just let you sign your name to it. Fix this, my mother screamed, lunging toward me. You are smart. You know these legal things. Call the lawyer. Tell them it was a mistake. I cannot fix a federal crime. Mom, I said, stepping back out of her reach, and I cannot fix the fact that you embezzled church funds. The treasurer will likely go to the police if the money is not returned, and since your accounts are frozen, you have no way to pay him. My father slumped back into his chair. For the first time, he wasn't looking for a way to blame me. He was looking at the ruin of his own making. What do we do? He wheezed. Rachel. What do we do? I looked at them two people who had laughed while stealing my daughter's life support. You figure it out, I said. I have to go make dinner for my daughter. I turned and walked away, leaving them in the dark kitchen with the ghosts of their choices. The silence behind me was heavier than any scream. They were beginning to realize that the money was the least of what they were about to lose. They showed up at my apartment door on Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. My mother looked like a specter of her former self. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a severe, messy bun, and her eyes were rimmed with red. My father stood behind her, wearing the same shirt he had worn on Tuesday. His posture slumped as if his spine had dissolved. I let them in, not out of kindness, but because I needed a witness to the end of their era. I motioned for them to sit at my small dining table. I did not offer them coffee. Rachel, my mother started, her voice trembling with a rehearsed fragility. We have not slept. Your father. He is talking about selling the cars. The neighbors are whispering, you cannot let this happen to us. You are our daughter. We changed your diapers. We paid for your braces. We took you in when you got divorced. She was playing the greatest hits of guilt, trying to pluck strings that had long since snapped. I remember, I said, sitting opposite them, my hands folded on top of a thick legal envelope. I also remember that I paid you $600 a month for rent when I moved back in. I remember that I paid for those braces myself with my high school job at the Dairy Queen. You have a convenient memory, Mom. We are family, she cried out, slamming her hand on the table. Family helps each other. We made a mistake with the money. Yes, but we were trying to build something for all of us. How can you be so cold? It is like I do not even know you. You do not know me, I replied, my voice steady and sharp. You know the version of me that was convenient for you, the one who stayed quiet, the one who let you call theft borrowing, but that version is gone. I opened the envelope and slid a document across the table. It was a confession of judgment drafted by Mr. Thorne. What is this? My father asked, squinting at the paper. It is a legal acknowledgement of debt, I explained. It states that you owe me $150,000, plus legal fees and interest. It also grants me an immediate lien on your house. If you sign this, I become a secured creditor. When the bank or the government comes for your assets because of the Vantage growth fraud, I get paid first, before the credit cards, before the boat deposit, even before the church. My father went pale. A lien. You want to put a lien on our home, Rachel. That is public record. Everyone will know. Everyone already knows you are a thief. Dad, I said. The only question is whether you want to lose the house to strangers or use it to pay back the granddaughter whose heart surgery you stole. I will not sign it, my mother shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair back. You ungrateful, spiteful little... We raised you. You owe us respect. You are trying to humiliate us. I am trying to save my daughter's life, I shouted back, my voice finally rising, cracking the calm facade I had maintained for weeks. You laughed. Mom, when you took that money, you laughed and thanked me for it. You looked me in the eye and told me my savings were better off in your pocket. You did not care if Lily lived or died, as long as you got your tiered status. The room went deadly silent. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The truth hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. I looked at my father. Here is the choice. Dad, you sign this document right now, securing my money against the equity in your house. Or I pick up this phone and call the police to report the identity theft regarding the wire transfer. I have the handwriting analysis ready. I have the recording of you admitting you bypassed my authorization. That is a felony. You will go to prison. My father looked at my mother, who was shaking with rage, her face twisted into a mask of ugly, raw hatred. Then he looked at the paper. He looked at the pen. Paul, do not you dare, my mother hissed. Do not let her win. It is not about winning. Linda, my father whispered, his voice breaking. It is about not going to jail. He picked up the pen. No, my mother screamed. She lunged for the paper, her fingernails scratching across the table. I forbid it. It is my house, too. I will not let you ruin my reputation for this. This brat, I caught her wrist before she could tear the document. My grip was iron. I looked into her eyes and saw nothing there but a terrifying, bottomless need for control. Sit down, I commanded. It was the first time in my life I had given her an order. She froze, shocked by the authority in my voice. She slumped back into her chair, sobbing not tears of sorrow, but tears of impotent rage. My father signed the document. His hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible, but it was there. He pushed it across the table to me. Are you happy? He asked, tears leaking from his eyes. You have destroyed us. No, Dad, I said, picking up the paper and checking the signature. I just stopped you from destroying me. I stood up and walked to the door, holding the paper that guaranteed my daughter's future. You need to leave now, I said. Mr. Thorne will file this with the county clerk on Monday morning. Do not try to sell the house. You cannot anymore. My mother walked past me, refusing to look at my face. She muttered something under her breath, a curse or a prayer. I couldn't tell. My father lingered for a second in the doorway. We just wanted a better life, he stammered. You had a good life, I said, closing the door on his face. "You just got greedy." I locked the deadbolt. The click echoed through the apartment. It was done. I had the judgment, but I knew this wasn't the end of the war. It was just the end of the battle for the money. The real reckoning was just beginning. On Monday morning at 8:30 sharp, Mr. Thorne filed the confession of judgment with the county recorder. The clerk stamped the document, a heavy, bureaucratic sound that signaled the end of my parents' autonomy. With that single ink mark, the equity in their 4-bedroom colonial on Elm Street legally became mine up to the value of $150,000. I did not feel joy. I felt the cold satisfaction of a balanced equation. By Wednesday, the private rot of the Donovan family had spilled into the public gutters of North Clay. The North Clay Chronicle had already picked up the story of the Vantage Growth collapse, but the local angle the involvement of the church treasurer and the subsequent freezing of parish funds made it front-page news. My father's name was mentioned as a key associate who had recruited others into the scheme. The illusion of the pious, sacrificial patriarch was not just cracked, it was shattered. My mother, however, refused to go down quietly. On Thursday afternoon, my phone began to vibrate incessantly with notifications from the neighborhood community page. She had posted a long, rambling manifesto tagging half the church congregation and the local school board. "It is a tragedy when a child turns on the parents who sacrificed everything for her," she wrote. "Our daughter, Rachel, is using a misunderstanding about investment timing to try to steal our family home. She has taken advantage of our financial distress to force us into signing legal papers. We are victims of fraud, and now victims of our own flesh and blood. Please pray for us." I sat in my office, reading the comments. Initially, they were supportive of her. People sent prayer hands emojis and angry face emojis, calling me ungrateful and heartless. They saw a grieving grandmother, not a felon. "You need to respond to this." My friend Sarah texted me. "They are destroying your reputation." "No," I replied. "I do not need to respond. I need to clarify." I did not write a long defense. I did not engage in name-calling. I simply logged into the forum and posted a single comment under her thread. It contained 2 attachments. The first was a redacted screenshot of the bank transfer showing the forged signature. The second was the audio file I had recorded in their kitchen, specifically the 30-second clip where my father admitted to bypassing my authorization and my mother laughed about buying a boat. I captioned it November 14th. "Admission of unauthorized wire transfer and forgery. The money stolen was the surgical fund for Lily's heart operation." The reaction was immediate and visceral. The internet does not forgive crimes against children. Within an hour, the comment section had turned into a bloodbath. The prayer hands vanished, replaced by demands for explanations and expressions of disgust. The image of the model parents evaporated, replaced by the reality of 2 narcissists who had gambled their granddaughter's life for a status symbol. That evening, my father called me. I answered on the speakerphone, recording the call as a matter of habit now. "Rachel," he said. His voice was unrecognizable thin, reedy, stripped of all its pompous bluster. "You have to take it down. The recording. People are calling the house. They are throwing eggs at the driveway. I cannot control public opinion." "Dad," I said, typing an email to Mr. Thorne as I spoke. "Mom wanted a public forum." She got one. She is not well," he stammered. "She is hysterical. She is talking about suing you for defamation." I told her to stop. I told her it is over. It is not defamation if it is true. I said, "And you should probably worry less about her lawsuits and more about your own defense. I heard the church board is holding an emergency meeting tonight regarding the missing $20,000. "I am not going," he whispered. "I cannot face them. That is a choice," I said, just like stealing my money was a choice. "Rachel, please," he said. and for the first time, I heard genuine fear in his voice. I am stepping back. I am moving into the guest room. I am separating my finances from hers as much as I can. Do not come after me personally. I will help you sell the house. Just leave me out of the next post. He was cutting her loose. The United Front had dissolved the moment the pressure became real. He was willing to sacrifice his wife to save his own reputation, just as he had been willing to sacrifice me. The legal process is already in motion. Dad, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. Cooperation will be noted, but it does not absolve you. The house goes on the market next week. If you obstruct the sale, the sheriff will execute the lien. I understand, he said. I am sorry. Save it for the judge, I said, and hung up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. I had stripped them of their money, their reputation, and now, their loyalty to each other. My mother was screaming into the void of the internet, and my father was hiding in a guest room, terrified of the doorbell. The chaotic noise of their downfall was deafening to everyone else, but in my apartment, it was perfectly, beautifully quiet. The path to the final confrontation was clear. I was not just getting the money back. I was rewriting the history of our family, and this time, the pen was in my hand. The settlement conference took place 3 weeks later in a conference room that smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. It was not a dramatic courtroom showdown. It was a quiet, suffocating shuffling of papers that dismantled 40 years of a marriage and 34 years of a family history. The forensic accounting was complete. The evidence of the forgery, the embezzlement from the church fund to cover their margin calls, and the reckless leveraging of their home was irrefutable. My parents sat on the opposite side of the mahogany table. My father looked smaller, as if he had physically shrunk inside his suit. His skin was gray, hanging loosely on his frame. My mother sat rigid, staring at a point on the wall just above my head, refusing to acknowledge my presence. Mr. Thorne slid the final agreement across the table. It was a deed in lieu of foreclosure. They were voluntarily surrendering the equity of the house to satisfy the judgment. They would have 30 days to vacate before the property was listed. The proceeds would cover the $150,000 plus legal fees. The rest, if there was any left after the bank and the other creditors took their share, would be theirs to restart their lives in a rental apartment. My father picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the signature line, trembling violently. I never wanted it to end like this, he whispered, his voice cracking. I just wanted peace. I looked at him, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Peace. You stole my daughter's surgery money to buy a boat. Dad, I was weak. Rachel. He choked out, tears dripping onto the crisp legal document. She needed to feel successful. She needed to feel important, and I was too tired to stop her. She has this way of making you feel like you are nothing if you do not give her what she wants. I have been afraid of her for 30 years. It was the first honest thing he had said to me in my entire life. He wasn't the strong provider or the wise patriarch I had idolized as a child. He was just a hostage who had developed Stockholm Syndrome. He had sacrificed his daughter and granddaughter to appease the tyrant in his kitchen. He signed the paper and pushed it away, burying his face in his hands. I felt no triumph. There is no victory in realizing your father is a coward. I just felt a heavy, dull acceptance. The money was safe. Lily would get her surgery. That was the only thing that mattered. The illusion of family had been the price of admission. My mother finally moved. She reached for the pen, not to sign, but to hold it like a weapon. She didn't look at the document. She finally turned her gaze to me. Her eyes were dry and hard as flint, devoid of any remorse. You think you are righteous, she said, her voice low and venomous. You think because you have the law on your side. You are the good person here. I am the person protecting my child, I said calmly. That is what a mother is supposed to do. A concept you seem to have forgotten. She laughed, a short, sharp sound that lacked all humor. You are protecting a bank account. You destroyed your family for cash. You threw us to the wolves, the neighbors, the church, the police just to prove a point. I did not throw you to the wolves. Mom, I said, I just stopped feeding you my flesh. She signed the paper with a violent scratch of the pen. Then she stood up, smoothing her skirt with terrifying precision. She leaned across the table, invading my personal space. Mr. Thorne started to rise to intervene, but I held up a hand. I needed to hear this. I needed to see exactly who she was one last time. Enjoy your money, Rachel, she hissed, her face inches from mine. But remember this when you are sitting alone in that hospital waiting room. You have my blood in your veins. You cut us out just as easily as I spent that money. You are not better than me. You are exactly like me. You just have a better lawyer. A chill went down my spine that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was a curse, spoken with the absolute conviction of a woman who could not conceive of a world where she was the villain. She was trying to plant a seed of doubt, to infect me with her own pathology. I am nothing like you, I whispered, more to myself than to her. I would die for Lily. You would only kill for yourself. She didn't blink. She just smiled, a cold, knowing curve of her lips that suggested she knew a secret I hadn't learned yet. She turned and walked out of the room without looking back at my father, leaving him sobbing at the table and the signed deed sitting between us like a tombstone. I picked up the paper. The weight of it felt immense. It was over. I had the means to save my daughter, but I had paid for it with the last shred of my innocence. I walked out of the office into the blinding afternoon sun, taking the first step toward a future where I was no longer a daughter, but simply and finally free. The surgery took place on a Tuesday in early March. I sat in the waiting room of the Children's Hospital for 7 hours, watching the second hand on the wall clock tick away the moments of my daughter's life. When the surgeon finally emerged, pulling his mask down to reveal a tired but genuine smile, I did not call my mother. I did not call my father. I called Mr. Thorne to confirm the escrow transfer. Lily's heart was fixed. The structural defect that had shadowed her childhood was repaired, replaced by a steady, rhythmic beat that promised a future. But the final twist of the knife, the one that severed the last thread of guilt I might have felt, had come 3 days before the operation. I had received a letter from the Insurance Review Board. After 6 months of fighting, appealing, and submitting piles of medical evidence, they had reversed their decision. The surgery was deemed medically necessary and fully covered. I stared at that letter and felt a cold, dark laughter bubble up in my throat. My parents had stolen $150,000, committed a felony, humiliated themselves publicly, and lost their home of 30 years for absolutely nothing. The panic that drove me to corner them, the desperation that fueled their greed, it was all rendered moot by a single administrative stamp. I could have stopped the sale of their house. I could have released the lien and let them keep their equity, knowing that insurance would cover the bills. A good daughter might have done that. A daughter who still sought their approval might have seen this as a sign to show mercy. But I was not that daughter anymore. I let the sale proceed. The closing happened while Lily was in the recovery room. The proceeds from the forced sale of the house on Elm Street were distributed. The bank took what was owed on the mortgage, the government took a portion for the taxes, and the remaining $152,000 was wired directly into a trust fund I had established solely for Lily's education. I did not keep a penny for myself. I did not buy a new car or a vacation. I put it where it belonged in the future they had tried to steal. I heard through the grapevine, Mrs. Gable is a relentless informant that my parents moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the south side of town, an area my mother used to turn her nose up at. My father spends his days sitting on a park bench, staring at the ducks, refusing to speak to anyone from the church. My mother has become a recluse, telling anyone who will listen that she was swindled by a vicious legal system, though fewer and fewer people are listening. They tried to contact me once, a week after we brought Lily home. A card arrived in the mail. It had no return address, just my mother's jagged, distinctive handwriting on the envelope. I stood over the kitchen trash can, holding the unopened envelope. I thought about the text messages accusing me of being toxic. I thought about the liquidity rotation. I thought about the boat they wanted to buy while my daughter's heart struggled to beat. Mommy Lily called out from the living room, "Can I have some juice?" "Coming, baby," I replied. I dropped the envelope into the trash, unopened. I did not need to know what she had to say. Her voice no longer held any power over me. There was no anger left, no burning desire for revenge, and certainly no forgiveness. There was only a vast, clean silence where they used to be. That night, after tucking Lily in, I logged into my bank account one last time to check the trust fund balance, $152,000. It was safe. It was locked away. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The air was crisp and clear. For the first time in 34 years, I was not afraid of the phone ringing. I was not afraid of being asked for a little favor. I was the villain in their story, but I was the hero in mine. And as I turned off the light, leaving the room in darkness, I finally slept the deep, dreamless sleep of the free. Thank you so much for tuning into this story. I would love to know where you guys are listening from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below because I read every single one and love connecting with you all. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more satisfying justice being served, please make sure to subscribe to the Victoria Revenge Stories channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this video reach even more people. See you in the next one.